The cold, sterile hum of the galactic warship Vexorian reverberated through its corridors. Far above Earth, floating among the stars, the vast ship seemed like an island of steel and light. Its generals and officers were figures of authority, staring out at the deep black void of space, unaware of the primitive world below. Earth had become little more than a curiosity to the Galactic Empire, a planet brimming with untapped resources buried beneath its dense jungles. The galaxy had long since passed Earth by, relegating it to a forgotten speck in the Empire's ever-expanding reach. But now, that world was beckoning them. General Kaler stood in the war room, his fingers curled tightly around a holographic display of the jungle. His calculating gaze swept over the data streaming across the screen, though it barely registered in his mind. His mind wasn't on Earth. It was on conquest, on the glory of the Galactic Empire and the power they could gain from the planet's hidden treasures. He was a man of action, coldly pragmatic, and above all, ruthless. His reputation as a tactician was unrivaled, but his obsession with victory often overshadowed his empathy for those who served under him. "Are we ready?" Kaler's voice was a low growl as he addressed his scout captain. Captain Dara stood at attention, the tension in her posture betraying her calm exterior. She had been with Kaler long enough to understand his unwavering dedication, though she had learned to fear the cost of his ambition. The mission was simple: send a team of scouts to Earth's jungle to survey the land, collect data, and confirm its potential as a resource hub for the Empire. But Dara knew that Kaler had already decided. The jungle was already a target, and the scouts were merely pawns in his grand scheme. "Ready as we'll ever be, General," Dara replied, her voice steady, but with a subtle edge. She had chosen the best team for the task, veterans who could navigate any environment, no matter how hostile. But even she could not ignore the sense of foreboding that seemed to hang in the air, thickening with every passing hour. Earth was a strange place, and while the Empire had long since calculated its natural resources, they had not accounted for its resilience. It was as though the planet itself had been waiting for an invasion, its dense jungles harboring mysteries far beyond the reach of their advanced technology. The landing was smooth. As the Vexorian descended through Earth's atmosphere, its hull glowing briefly as it cut through the atmosphere, a sense of unease settled over the crew. Dara's scouts, a team of 6 elite soldiers, stood at the ready in the dropship, their expressions unreadable as they watched the planet below. 5 minutes to landing, one of the soldiers muttered, checking his equipment. "We are not here for sightseeing." Kaler's voice crackled over the comms. "Remember, this is a reconnaissance mission. Nothing more. Understand?" Dara nodded. She understood, but she also knew that Kaler's orders, once given, were rarely up for debate. The jungle was a potential goldmine for the Empire, and failure would not be tolerated. The dropship's engines roared as they descended into the thick canopy. Earth's jungles were a vast expanse of green, stretching for miles in every direction. The trees were towering giants, their trunks twisted and thick with age, their leaves a vibrant mix of colors and shadows. Yet, despite the beauty of the landscape, there was an undeniable sense of danger. The air was thick with humidity, the atmosphere dense and oppressive, like a living organism that could suffocate you if given the chance. As the team disembarked, the sounds of the jungle greeted them: bird calls, rustling leaves, and the distant growl of some unseen creature. The ground was soft beneath their boots, the soil wet and spongy from the constant rain that bathed the jungle in a near-perpetual drizzle. The jungle seemed alive in ways that unnerved them, its vastness stretching out in all directions, offering no clear path forward. "Stay close and stay alert," Dara ordered, her voice cutting through the cacophony of the jungle. She had been briefed on the mission, but the weight of what they were about to do hung heavy on her shoulders. Earth was a world of mystery, and its wilderness seemed to pulse with an ancient, unknown force. The scouts moved in a tight formation, their boots crunching softly on the ground as they advanced. Kaler's orders were clear: gather data, identify any potential threats, and report back. But as they ventured deeper into the jungle, Dara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The dense foliage seemed to hide something that had been waiting for them. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the jungle became. The sounds of wildlife grew louder, and there was a strange, eerie stillness that blanketed the surroundings. Every now and then, one of the scouts would pause, scanning the area with their advanced tech, but nothing significant came up on their instruments. The jungle was calm, almost too calm. It was the calm before the storm. Suddenly, one of the scouts, a quiet but capable soldier, froze in place. His hand shot out to grab Dara's arm, his face pale. "What is it?" she whispered, her pulse quickening. Listen's eyes were wide, his breath shallow. He pointed toward the trees ahead. Dara followed his gaze, but there was nothing there, just the dense canopy and shadows. Still, a chill ran down her spine. Something was wrong. Listen, stammered, his voice barely audible. "I swear I saw something move." In the trees. Dara raised a hand, signaling for the group to stop. She scanned the surroundings, every instinct telling her that they were not alone. For a moment, the jungle held its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Kaler's voice crackled through her calm. "Stop wasting time. Keep moving forward." The order was sharp, decisive. Dara didn't question it, but she couldn't help the growing unease that gnawed at her. They pushed forward, but now, every step felt heavier. The jungle silence had shifted into something more sinister. The air seemed to thicken, the trees closing in around them, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then, without warning, it happened. A rustling sound erupted from the foliage to their right, followed by a terrifying, guttural growl. The scouts froze, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the dark shadows ahead. Before anyone could react, a massive form lunged from the underbrush, its sheer size and speed catching them off guard. A blur of teeth and claws tore into one of the scouts, sending him crashing to the ground with a scream. The team opened fire instinctively, but the creature, whatever it was too fast, darting back into the trees before they could get a clean shot. The jungle seemed to swallow the sounds of the attack, leaving only the thudding of hearts in their ears. "Get back to the ship," Dara ordered, voice tight with panic. But Kaler's voice came over the comms again, colder than before. "Continue the mission. We are not retreating." As the scouts reluctantly pressed forward, the feeling of danger escalated with every passing minute. They had underestimated the jungle, and now the jungle was making its presence known. The Empire's mission, their calculated invasion, had awakened something that would not rest until they were gone. Dara's thoughts raced, her fear mingling with a reluctant respect for the unknown forces at work in the jungle. The real enemy wasn't just the creatures lurking in the shadows. It was Earth itself, fighting back against the invaders. As the team moved deeper into the heart of the jungle, the true nature of the mission began to dawn on her. The jungle wasn't just a resource to be exploited. It was a force of nature, ancient and powerful, and it would not be conquered, not without a fight. And as they ventured further, Dara knew that none of them might ever return. The jungle swallowed them whole, its dense canopy cutting out what little sunlight remained. Even though the weight of the atmosphere was stifling, there was a strange, eerie stillness to the air. The crackling of distant creatures and rustling of unseen movements only heightened the tension. Dara felt it in her bones, The jungle was alive, watching them. There were no simple boundaries here. It was no longer just a mission. It was a fight for survival. Dara led the way, the rest of the scouts trailing behind her in tense silence. Each footfall felt like an intrusion, the soft, squelching sound of boots in the damp undergrowth, a constant reminder that they weren't alone. The fear had begun to take root, creeping into the scouts' minds, gnawing at their resolve. Even Asha, who had been the most resilient before, was now looking over her shoulder at every crack of a branch or fluttering leaf. Kaler, as always, was resolute, his face set in an expression of cold determination. He was a man of action, a general who led by example, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, had begun to show a flicker of doubt. Dara had seen that look before, when a mission was slipping out of his control. But there was no turning back now. The Empire had given him an order, and he would follow it to the end. The galaxy's thirst for expansion, for power, had brought them here. Earth was just another prize to be claimed, another world to conquer. But it wasn't like any other world they'd encountered before. "Keep moving," Kaler ordered. His voice was stern, though it trembled slightly at the edges, betraying his unease. His earlier bravado was slipping away, but he masked it with authority. Dara glanced back at him, her lips pressed together in a tight line. She knew the signs. Kaler's iron resolve was fracturing, that the jungle had taken something from them. They'd already lost Listen, the first scout, and now Talon had vanished into the shadows, his screams swallowed by the earth itself. Yet Kaler, undeterred, pushed the team forward, unwilling to concede to the forces around them. Dara couldn't help but wonder if this stubbornness would be their undoing. But they had no choice. The mission was far from over, and failure was an option. Their orders were clear. They had to reach the heart of the jungle, collect any information they could, and report back. But something told her this wasn't just about resources anymore. Earth wasn't a planet to be measured or quantified. It was a force to be reckoned with. The path ahead seemed to narrow, the trees pressing in closer with every step. The sound of the jungle was overwhelming, as if the entire forest had come alive, the pulse of its life force emanating from every leaf, every branch. Dara felt a twinge in her gut, a cold, prickling sensation that they were walking into something far more dangerous than any enemy they'd ever faced. Asha was the first to speak, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound strong. "Dara, we have to turn back. Something's wrong. We're not supposed to be here. This place, it's different." Dara could hear the desperation in Asha's voice. It mirrored her own growing doubts. They had underestimated the jungle, assumed it would fall easily to their superior technology, their strength. But Earth was old, ancient, and unlike anything they had encountered before. It wasn't just nature. It was alive, a living, breathing entity pushing back against their intrusion. She turned to Kaler, her expression one of reluctant questioning. He had to see it too, the change in the air, the subtle shift in the environment. But Kaler's expression was as cold as ever. "We're not turning back," he said sharply, as if reading her thoughts. "We're here to complete the mission. We will not fail." It wasn't the first time he had said it, and it wouldn't be the last. Kaler had always been a man of unwavering purpose, but Dara could sense that even he was starting to feel the weight of this place. There were things in the jungle that they didn't understand, things that defied all their calculations, their technology, their expectations. Dara had seen it in the way the others had begun to falter in their resolve. Asha's hands shook as she gripped her weapon, and Talon's disappearance had left a hole in their ranks that couldn't be filled. Still, they pressed on. The deeper they went, the darker the jungle became, its thick vines and towering trees blotting out the last remnants of sunlight. Dara's heart thudded heavily in her chest. It was as if the jungle was pressing in on them, surrounding them with its dark, impenetrable walls. Then, without warning, the air grew colder. A sudden gust of wind stirred the leaves, sending a chill through the team. It felt like a warning. The sudden shift in temperature was palpable, a sharp contrast to the stifling humidity they had been trudging through. The jungle itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. Dara signaled the team to halt, her instincts screaming that something was wrong. They had reached a clearing, the dense underbrush opening up for just a moment. But there was no peace here. The stillness was suffocating, unnatural. "Stay alert," Dara whispered, her hand resting lightly on her weapon. Her gaze swept over the clearing, but there was no movement, no sign of life. It was as though the jungle itself was holding its secrets behind thick curtains of foliage. Kaler stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the undergrowth. He was still the leader, still the one with the iron will, but Dara could see the strain in his posture, the way his fingers clenched tighter around the hilt of his weapon. They had been in hostile territory before, but this was different. The silence stretched on, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves, but Dara could feel the tension in the air, thick as tar. She turned to Asha, who stood frozen, her eyes wide, darting back and forth as though searching for something just beyond her reach. "Dara," Asha whispered, voice barely audible. "I saw it. In the trees. Something's out there." Dara stiffened, but before she could respond, a sound, a low growl, deep and guttural, echoed from the jungle behind them. It wasn't an animal, not anything they had encountered before. It was something ancient, something more primal. It rumbled through the clearing like a warning, a declaration of intent. Dara's breath caught in her throat. "Weapons up," she ordered, her voice loud and sharp. She turned to Kaler, who, for the first time, looked less certain. The growl had triggered something in him, too. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. "Doesn't matter," Dara said, her voice cold as steel. "We need to move. Now." The growl came again, louder this time, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate. Something massive was out there, something that moved through the jungle with a speed and precision that defied all logic. Without another word, they began to move, the team breaking into a hurried march through the clearing, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow. The jungle had become a trap, and they were the prey. Whatever was out there, whatever had been watching them from the trees, was no longer hiding. Kaler's voice crackled over the comms. "We can't let it stop us. We must complete the mission." But his words were empty, hollow. The jungle wasn't listening to him. The jungle didn't care about the mission. The jungle was in charge now. And in that moment, Dara knew they were already too far gone. They weren't going to make it out. Earth had claimed them, and there was no way back. The jungle no longer seemed to be just a place. They were inside a living, breathing thing, each step drawing them deeper into the belly of a beast they didn't understand. Dara could feel the tension in every fiber of her being, her mind racing through the possible outcomes, none of which offered any comfort. It was as though Earth had grown sentient, angry that they dared to tread its sacred ground. The growls they had heard earlier were still reverberating in her mind, deep, vibrating sounds that didn't belong to any creature they had cataloged in their records. Dara's heart pounded as she pushed through the underbrush, her boots slipping on the slick, damp ground. Behind her, the team followed in tight formation, each of them looking over their shoulders, hands clutching their weapons with white-knuckled grip. Kaler was still at the front, his face drawn tight with concentration, but the tension in his posture had not escaped Dara's notice. He was just as unsettled as the rest of them, though he hid it well. They hadn't spoken since the growl. The jungle had swallowed their words. the overwhelming sense of being watched smothering all other thoughts. There was no doubt in Dara's mind now. Earth was fighting back. She had seen planets turn hostile before, but this was different. There was no external enemy, no insurgents to battle, no hostile forces to outgun. Earth itself was the adversary, a wild, primal force that didn't care about their technology, their weapons, or their advanced military training. Ahead of her, Asha stumbled, her foot catching on an unseen root. Dara reached out instinctively, catching her by the shoulder to steady her. "You all right?" Dara's voice was soft but urgent, a reminder of their frailty in this unforgiving place. Asha nodded, though her eyes were wide with fear. "I saw something again. It's still watching us, Dara. It's getting closer." Dara's stomach twisted at the implication. They were being hunted. The feeling of being pursued, of being stalked by something far beyond their understanding, was palpable. Each rustle of leaves, each movement in the trees, sent a jolt of fear through her veins. They were surrounded. There was no safe place. Kaler halted suddenly, raising his hand to signal for the group to stop. Dara instinctively slowed, her gaze darting ahead. She could see his eyes narrowing, scanning the jungle with military precision. Yet there was something else, something almost imperceptible, that made her pause. "What's wrong?" she asked. Kaler's voice was low, but sharp. "We're too exposed here. We need to keep moving, but we can't stay out in the open like this." Before Dara could respond, there was a sudden crash from behind them, followed by another growl, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated in the air. The earth itself seemed to shudder under the force of it. Kaler spun around, weapon raised, eyes wide. "Stay in formation," he barked, but even his command lacked the usual certainty. His voice trembled slightly, and Dara could see the crack in his composed exterior. He wasn't in control anymore. They were no longer in charge of their own fates. The jungle had become their master. Asha, now visibly shaking, whispered, "It's here." Dara's grip tightened on her weapon, her pulse quickening. She could hear it now, too, the unmistakable sound of something massive moving through the underbrush. It was closer, far too close. Something in the distance let out another terrifying growl, this time much louder, and a branch snapped under the weight of something heavy. The air was thick with anticipation, and every second stretched into eternity. Suddenly, the trees ahead of them shifted. It was subtle at first, a rustle, a movement, but then it became undeniable. A shape, enormous and hulking, emerged from the shadows, breaking through the dense foliage with frightening speed. It was covered in dark, mottled fur that blended perfectly with the surrounding jungle, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. The creature was not like anything Dara had seen before. Nothing in the galaxy compared to the terror it invoked. A massive jaw opened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth, each one capable of tearing through armor. The creature's growl was deafening, filling the air with a primal rage. Its claws scraped against the bark of a tree as it padded forward, its size dwarfing anything they had ever faced. For a brief moment, all Dara could do was stare, frozen by the enormity of the creature, the sheer magnitude of the threat. "Fire!" Kaler shouted, but his voice was barely heard over the roar of the jungle. The team erupted into motion, weapons blazing, the sound of gunfire and energy blasts filling the air. But it was clear that their weapons were useless. The creature absorbed the hits like they were nothing more than a gentle breeze, its massive body undeterred. A shot to its shoulder caused it to stagger, but it quickly recovered, snarling in fury. The jungle around them seemed to come alive, responding to the creature's call. Vines and branches twisted, reaching out as if to ensnare them. Retreat, Kaler ordered, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Dara didn't need to be told twice. They had no chance in a direct confrontation. The creature was too powerful, and they were too vulnerable. She grabbed Asha by the arm, pulling her along as they moved backward, desperately trying to create distance. The rest of the team followed, their steps frantic as they backpedaled through the thick jungle. But the creature was relentless. It wasn't simply hunting them. It was hurting them, pushing them deeper into the heart of the jungle where escape was impossible. Asha tripped, falling to her knees. Dara turned back, her breath ragged, eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, she pulled Asha up, her hand gripping the scout's arm with urgency. They couldn't afford to slow down. The others were already ahead, but even with their superior training, they were struggling to maintain their ground. The jungle was closing in, its dense foliage creating a maze they couldn't navigate. "Keep moving," Kaler's voice rang out, distorted through the chaos. Dara turned, pushing Asha forward. The scout stumbled beside her, her face pale with terror. "We can't outrun it. It's too fast, too strong." Dara didn't respond. She couldn't afford to speak. Every second felt like a countdown to their inevitable end. She could hear the creature getting closer, its growls growing louder. They were too slow. They were never going to outrun it. "Kaler," Dara gasped as she tried to keep pace with the others. "What now?" Kaler didn't answer immediately. His face was grim, his jaw clenched. It was rare for Kaler to hesitate, but now, with the creature closing in and the jungle itself against them, it was clear they were out of options. "We fight," he said, his voice steady but edged with something more primal. Something akin to desperation. Dara's heart sank. This was no longer a battle they could win, but they would fight anyway. It was all they had left. The creature was upon them, the jungle writhing as it shifted in response to its presence. And then, in that moment of impending doom, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Something was happening, something beyond their understanding. The jungle was alive, and it was changing. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the air growing thicker as if the earth itself was preparing for the final confrontation. "Hold your ground," Kaler yelled, and the team braced for impact. Dara's grip on her weapon tightened. There was no turning back now. The battle had begun. The jungle would determine who would survive. The ground beneath them shook violently, as if the entire jungle itself was rejecting their presence. The trees groaned, their massive trunks bending under the unseen weight, and the air seemed to pulse with a low, resonating hum. Dara's heart raced, her breath shallow, as she fought to keep her balance in the trembling earth. The creature loomed closer, its massive, hulking form just a few meters away now, its glowing eyes fixated on the team with an unblinking hunger. "Hold fast!" Kaler's command sliced through the chaos, his voice carrying a note of finality, though it was strained. He had never sounded so unsure. The creature was too fast, too powerful. Nothing in the scouts' training could have prepared them for something like this. They had underestimated Earth's resistance, its rage. Dara gripped her weapon tighter, her knuckles white. The barrel of her gun gleamed under the dim light that filtered through the canopy above. She fired at the creature, her shots aimed at its massive chest, but the creature barely flinched. It howled, the sound sending a shock wave through the air, and lunged forward, its claws tearing through the underbrush like paper. The ground shook again as its massive body surged closer, intent on obliterating the team. There was no time for a coordinated response. Each scout fired as rapidly as possible, but the bullets and energy blasts did little more than leave superficial burns on its dark, thick hide. It seemed impervious to their weapons, shrugging off their attacks with an almost bored indifference. Dara's pulse quickened as she fired another round. desperation creeping into her movements. They were running out of time. Behind her, Asha's voice quivered with fear. "It's not stopping. We can't stop it." Kaler, however, wasn't finished yet. He gritted his teeth, raising his hand to signal the group to retreat, though it was already too late. The creature was upon them, its massive maw opening in a grotesque, final roar, as if sealing their fate. The rest of the team scattered, but Dara couldn't pull away fast enough. The creature was too quick. It lunged again, claws outstretched, and with terrifying precision, it swiped at Kaler, its claws slicing through the air like an unstoppable force of nature. Time seemed to slow as Dara watched in horror. Kaler tried to dodge, but the creature's claws grazed his side, a massive wound opening in his flesh. He collapsed, his weapon clattering to the ground beside him. The other scouts were already on the move, but Kaler's fall left them paralyzed, a brief moment of disbelief seizing them. The fear had become tangible, suffocating, as if they were all trapped in some cosmic game where Earth was both the hunter and the prey. "Kaler!" Dara shouted, rushing forward, but before she could reach him, the creature turned its massive head toward her, its eyes narrowing with predatory focus. It wasn't going to let them escape. Her heart slammed in her chest as she realized the creature was not hunting them for food. It was hunting them for sport. There was no way they could win this battle, not without something far beyond the weapons and training they had at their disposal. The jungle around them pulsed and shifted, as if the environment itself was responding to the violence that had taken root within it. The trees seemed to move, bending inward, their roots snaking out of the soil as if to imprison them. The air thickened, almost suffocating, and the sky above grew darker as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling. Dara's mind raced, her thoughts spinning through a dozen different plans, but none of them made sense. There was no winning this fight, no path to escape. They were trapped. But then, just as all hope seemed lost, something changed. A low, resonant growl echoed from deep within the jungle, so different from the one of the creature before them. This new growl was full of power, of something primal, but it was not the same. The creature before them paused, its massive body tensing as it tilted its head in response to the sound. The jungle grew even quieter, as if holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Then it appeared. A figure, cloaked in shadows, emerged from the dense foliage, moving with an eerie grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The creature before them shrank back instinctively, its eyes flicking nervously to the newcomer. This figure was not like anything they had seen before. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was covered in jagged, armor-like plates, and its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that could not be denied. It was both alien and familiar, like a being that had evolved to become something else entirely, a force of nature in its own right. The creature before them, sensing the threat, made an awful, shrill sound and lunged at the new figure. But the newcomer moved faster, effortlessly sidestepping the creature's savage attack. Without a moment's hesitation, it reached out and touched the creature's chest, and the jungle seemed to respond, shuddering in unison. The creature howled, a cry of both pain and confusion, as it stumbled backward, its body twisting in strange, unnatural ways. Then, with a final scream, it collapsed, its massive form twitching on the ground before going still. Dara's breath caught in her throat, her body frozen in place. She had no idea what had just happened. The jungle was still, the tension hanging in the air like a heavy weight. The figure that had appeared, this strange and powerful being, stood in front of the fallen creature, surveying the scene with an expression of detached contemplation. Then, it turned to face Dara and the remaining scouts. Its eyes gleamed with something ancient, something unspoken. For a moment, Dara thought she saw a flicker of recognition in its gaze, like it knew who they were, like it understood what they had come to Earth for. What? Kaler's voice was hoarse. His body still crumpled on the ground. His wounds were deep, blood staining the dirt beneath him. The question seemed to hang in the air, his voice filled with a desperate mix of anger and confusion. The figure regarded him silently for a long moment, its expression unreadable. Then it spoke, its voice deep and resonant, carrying an echo of something primal, as if it had been shaped by the earth itself. Earth does not belong to you. It is a living thing, and it will never bend to your will. Dara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't understand. Was this what had been watching them? A guardian? A force of nature sent to protect the planet? Dara started, but her voice faltered as she realized how futile their mission had been from the start. They were nothing here. Their technology, their weapons, all the might of the Galactic Empire. It meant nothing in the face of Earth's wrath. We were wrong, Kaler rasped, his voice breaking. He had always believed they could conquer anything, but the truth was clear now. Earth could not be controlled, and they had been foolish to think otherwise. The figure didn't respond, but it stepped forward, moving with fluidity and purpose. It reached down to Kaler, who lay battered and broken, and in a swift motion, it placed its hand upon his forehead. The jungle seemed to come alive with energy, and for a brief moment, the chaos of the last few hours faded, leaving only a heavy, unnatural stillness. Kaler's breathing slowed, and his eyes fluttered open, his wounds already beginning to heal. The figure's gaze remained on him for a moment longer, before it turned and vanished back into the jungle, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Dara stood frozen, her mind struggling to comprehend the events unfolding before her. The jungle, Earth itself, had just claimed them. There was no victory to be had. There was only survival. And now, all that was left was to leave this place behind and never return. The scouts, broken and exhausted, would never forget the lesson Earth had taught them. It wasn't conquerable. Not by them. Not by anyone. And they were lucky to have made it out alive.